Rural Americans deserve access to the best of what our nation has to offer, especially healthcare. Across every state and every community, America's rural hospitals are the first line of defense, protecting our families, neighbors, and loved ones. No matter where you live, hospital care doesn't clock out. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Each year, America's over 5,000 hospitals care for millions of patients, providing 24/7 emergency care, delivering babies, cancer treatments, and other life-saving care that patients rely on. Behind every one of those patients are doctors, nurses, and caregivers working tirelessly to keep people healthy and safe. Hospitals are our community's lifelines. They employ our neighbors and keep our families healthy. But now, some in Congress are threatening access to care. Tell Congress, protect patient care to keep America strong. Don't cut rural health care.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
Excuse me, taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
You are now diving head first into the deep end of the Stone Zone. You got President Donald Trump practicing the peace through strength doctrine of Dwight Eisenhower and after him Ronald Reagan, where Trump was essentially elected as an anti-war president, certainly an anti-interventionist president, but that does not mean that he won't use lethal U.S. power in a limited way to achieve his objectives. And the way he has used a combination of military might, economic suasion and pressure, and very wisely cutting off oil to the communist Chinese as well as the Russians, shows an extraordinarily complicated and brilliant foreign policy. And now we get stunning new details emerging about how close Iran may have been to building nuclear weapons. It's not clear how close they may yet be, and how defiant its regime has been in negotiations with the United States. Steve Witkoff, who's a very good guy, was with the president and Witkoff Saturday night at Mar-a-Lago. We had dinner, and the president correctly said that Witkoff is the only man in the history of Manhattan real estate who was uniformly liked. That the Manhattan world of real estate, particularly big real estate, is a dog eat dog business. President Trump once joked that dealing with all the world leaders like Putin and Chairman Xi was child's play compared to negotiating with the big players in Manhattan real estate, but that Witkoff as a man was universally liked and has served his country as a special envoy on assignment for the president to try to negotiate peace in some of the world's hotspots, including in Iran. He revealed Monday that Iranian officials openly admitted during their recent talks that they possess enough highly enriched uranium to build 11 nuclear bombs. According to Witkoff, Iranian negotiators stated without hesitation that they control roughly 460 milligrams of uranium enriched to 60% purity. Now, experts say that material could be refined to 90% relatively quickly, weapons grade level, in about a week to 10 days. So Iran also holds thousands of additional kilograms enriched at lower levels, which could be weaponized within weeks. As the regime teeters, who has control of these and where they are become central questions. Steve Witkoff, who's a fine gentleman, and Jared Kushner, the president's highly effective son-in-law, who brought us the Abraham Accords, for which he deserves accolades, engaged in 3 rounds of indirect talks with Iran in Oman and Geneva, Switzerland earlier this year. What was a last-ditch attempt by Witkoff and Kushner to avoid a military conflict. From the start, Iran took a hard line, insisting that it had an inalienable right to enrich uranium. the U.S. response was clear that they had to stop and limit their nuclear development to the generation of electricity only, peaceful purposes, and that U.S. monitors had to be able to guarantee that, but that any path to nuclear weapons was off the table. America has a right to stop them. As Witkoff said, the U.S. even offered to supply the Iranians with civilian nuclear fuel for a decade if Tehran would agree to halt enrichment tied to weapons, which is quite an olive branch. Iran rejected that proposal outright. Witkoff, who is a very shrewd negotiator, said the Iranians were proud of their nuclear enrichment capability and their ability to evade the oversight to which they had previously agreed in the charade Iranian weapons deal. That's the one where there were off the books $47 million on pallets being used for essentially political payoffs that the American taxpayers are never told about. That's outside the signed agreement in which they agreed to stop their nuclear weapons developments while continuing to vote ahead. And the Obama administration, followed by Joe Biden, are kind of dumb enough to believe them. Witkoff has pointed out that with the U.S. Israeli conflict against Iran now intensifying, it became clear that Iran really had no intention of ever abandoning its nuclear weapons. What Witkoff is saying is that he and Trump finally figured out that the Iranians were just playing for time to refortify their position and try to do everything they could to expedite their danger in the nuclear space. One of the things that is, of course, interesting to me with the decapitation of the supreme leader, Khomeini, who was reduced to a ring. I guess they found his ring. That'd be a grisly trophy. And 40 of his top henchmen. But we also know that Iran continues to fire both rockets and launch drone attacks on its various Arab neighbors. So the regime is not dead. How crippled, how wounded this incredibly brutal mullah-led regime is, and the contingencies they had planned for just this moment is one thing we're going to talk to our next guest about. That's Senator Robert Torricelli of New Jersey, a former member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, also serving on the Rules Committee, the Judiciary Committee, a leader against the communist regime and narco-Marxism in this hemisphere, joins us. He has always been an active in Middle Eastern affairs particularly, and has a unique perspective on the situation in Iran and how wounded the regime is. The key to this fight, of course, with Trump is, once again, limited action. He goes into Iran, he goes into Venezuela, he goes into Iran again. Again, no boots on the ground, no mass American casualties. I think 2 or 3 Americans died, and I think 5 Israelis died because of an incoming drone that evaded Israeli airspace. That's the last I had read. So Trump is, I think, bridging a gap between the neocons in his party, like Lindsey Graham, who would really, jump into any war, kind of shoot first to ask questions later. He must have really woken up excited with the news of the war. But Trump, I think, understands that this kind of projection of American power, which, let's give Pete Hegseth and his reforms credit. Trump has restored the lethality and the skill of the U.S. military. The operation backing law enforcement in Venezuela was a textbook. It was the thing of James Bond in terms of the daring nature of that. It was not a regime change effort, but more precisely an effort to arrest a man who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans who died of fentanyl and other drug poisoning because of drugs that he forced into the country. So the president ultimately, I think, moved to this position once he figured out that the Muellers were just playing him for time. But just to be clear, this is a regime that had brutally murdered Americans, has a long history of doing so, all the way back to the attack on the Marine barracks in Beirut, and thousands of more over time. They kept and continued to threaten to close the Strait of Hormuz, which would have a very, very deleterious impact on oil prices. Oil prices would skyrocket with that kind of a blockade. On the other hand, General Michael Flynn was with us last weekend and pointed out, given his assessment of the Iranian Navy and the fitness for combat of the U.S. Navy, said we could reopen it within hours, that we have that capability. Now, is there anyone out there who thinks that Donald Trump would fail to do that? On day 4 of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump declared the United States will crush the Iranian threat and easily prevail. Speaking at the White House, Trump projected what he thought would be a 4 to 5 week campaign, but emphasized the U.S. will do whatever it takes to neutralize Tehran's missile, navy, and proxy capabilities. The president has always said you never telegraph to the enemy what your plan is. You can understand why he doesn't want to be pinned down on the fact that he surely understands that even the American people don't have the patience for more endless foreign war, no boots on the ground, no mass casualties, and not millions and millions more of defense spending and other contracting connected to an endless foreign war. That's not what Trump got elected on. On the other hand, he's not going to announce his hand. The Pentagon reports more than 1,250 U.S. strikes on Iranian targets, dismantling key military infrastructure, and, of course, eliminating the senior figures, including, of course, the supreme leader, that is the Ayatollah Khamenei, not to be confused with the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was at the helm of the 1979 revolution, in which I believe 64 Americans were arrested and kept hostages for something like 455 days until their fear of Ronald Reagan over the weak-kneed, responsive Jimmy Carter persuaded them to release those Americans. And they continued to butcher people in their own streets. The leading resistance group, the most public of them, the MEK, had literally thousands of their members who favor, a democratic election and the overturn of this autocratic regime. Thousands of them publicly executed in the streets to serve as a warning. This is a brutal regime, which makes the uprising of the Iranian people against it at the very beginning all the more courageous, because these people are capable and have done these mass executions as a part of their operating style. It's also important to recognize that, to a great extent, the regime uses the specter of the return of the Shah's son, the Shah being almost as deeply unpopular as the mullahs themselves because of his human rights abuses, even though it was a more cosmopolitan society. I agree with those like Rudy Giuliani who say that the replacement for a theocracy, this theocracy particularly, should not be a new monarchy. I'll get a lot of bots who will attack me about that and talk about the House of Pahlavi. Look, I think what Carter did to the Shah was disgraceful. Trump predicted this time would come. He predicted the rise of the mullahs because of our abandonment of the Shah, and I agree with that. But Shah was no paragon of human rights. The viciousness of his Sabak, the secret police, was famous. So it is time for them to move into the world of democracy.
If you're looking to create, grow, and sustain your wealth, download and subscribe to the Pain Points of Wealth podcast at BeBullish.com with Bob, Ryan, and Chris Payne. It's your podcast for market insights, money tips, and real talk on the economy.
Download and subscribe
at BeBullish.com.